This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Well, I guess you could say things were kind of back to normal after this past weekend. At least when it comes to the AEW end of things. With Raw, I can't really say because I did not watch the show. Although I did hear it was more tolerable than usual. I don't know what that means, but without Vince running the ship, I imagine there was at least a shred of coherency to what was going on. Based on my SummerSlam coverage, I feel like I'm probably in the minority with my belief that the show really wasn't all that good. But that also could be crusty and out of touch with what modern fans are into, as is always the case when we're talking about AEW. I honestly don't even know what there is to say about that show anymore. I think it's hysterical that it's only taken people an entire year to realize what a complete waste of time Rampage is. Christ, I've been saying that since when? January? Maybe even a little before that. And here we are in August of 2022, and people are now finally come to the realization, yeah, you know what? That show kind of sucks. You think? Wonder what gave that away. Could it be the lack of star power or anything remotely worth talking about coming out of the show? The fact that nothing ever has any meaning or implication for the Dynamite program? I'm glad people are finally coming around to that. Slow but steady. It also kind of struck me when I was watching NWA World Championship Wrestling for the retro review part of the show today. The Ric Flair interview with Tony Schiavone made me realize, oh yeah, Ric Flair kind of had a retirement match over the weekend that I completely forgot about, nor did I have any intention of watching to begin with. I heard it sucked. So there's my review of that, in case you were wondering. Speaking of suck, hey, think you know what I'm eventually going to segue into. Before that, make sure that if you are tuning into the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast for the first time, that you subscribe, comment, and like the show. We are here every Monday and Friday for new content and wrestling recaps on YouTube and Rumble. Everything from the modern content to the retro content, we cover it here on the FSWR channel. And it is a straight shoot podcast, so if you don't like controversial takes on the wrestling business, you'll probably be better off listening to those average schmucks that pump up AEW every week and pretend it's the greatest wrestling product to have ever existed on the planet Earth. You know what, while we're on the subject of AEW, the Dynamite Report is not going to take me all that long this week, so while it's on my mind, I figured I might just get this out there in the open. I don't know what's going on with Tony Khan. It's obvious the guy's trying to juggle way too many plates. And, aside from me constantly coming on here and talking about how bad this program has been for the last few months now, you would think that with all the happenings on WWE's end in the last week that maybe Tony would be working to try and piece together a somewhat consistent television program. I'm not even talking strictly wrestling. I'm just talking nuts and bolts, good, competent TV. There have been a lot of people out there comparing the last month or so of AEW television to the way Russo used to hotshot on either TNA or the dying days of Nitro. And you know what? Far be it for me to try and give Russo credit where it's due, but I'd probably at least make the argument that Russo's incoherent bullshit was more coherent than Tony's. Because at least when you look back at Russo's ADHD booking, at least his stuff actually created some memorable moments worth talking about. And even though he came up with a lot of horrible crap, at least Russo would have one or two central storylines that he would always be writing in for a given week. You know, whether it was faction warfare or heel managers running the show to try to make the babyfaces' lives miserable, etc. Can anyone name a single consistent storyline on AEW right now? Anyone? You know, the Jericho appreciation garbage is terrible and takes up the bulk of the screen time every week to begin with, but to this day, I still never had a single clue why him and Eddie Kingston ever feuded, or why the Blackpool Combat Club got in there to feud with them. You know, aside from, we had a War Game show to promote, so they needed some bodies to fill the ring. But you're telling me that out of an entire roster of closing in on the triple digits, you can't find one single top-level program to consistently book and keep people's attention for several weeks at a time? Your world champion is completely feckless. All he does is do horrible outlaw GCW-style matches every week with guys we're given no reason to care about. Wardlow hasn't had any consistent booking since he beat MJF at Double or Nothing a few months ago. I still have no idea what the hell's going on with Bryan Danielson. And you know, when you had something in your grasp that you could have done something with, i.e. Christian Cage turning heel on Jungle Boy, you end up ruining it by making Jungle Boy's comeback a total popcorn fart. Now you've turned the dinosaur after 3 weeks of him being a heel for no reason. And we'll talk about the Powerhouse Hobbs and Ricky Starks thing in a while. But the short and sweet of it is, the show lacks consistency. Everyone's floundering around. There's no top storyline or big program worth investing in. And we're like, what, 4 weeks out from their next pay-per-view? And I've heard about some of these new changes and promotions that AEW's added to their staff to try and improve things behind the scenes. In other words, delegate tasks so that Tony Khan doesn't end up becoming the next sponsor for keeps with all the hair he's ripping out of his head trying to run all this shit. And who are these big promotions that are supposed to enhance the quality of the product? They've hired Madison Rayne to coach the female division. Okay. Apparently they've also promoted Sanjay Dutt to VP of Production, Pat Buck to VP of Talent Development, which, God almighty, does that guy have his work cut out for him? And Tony Schiavone is now senior producer. I think I also read he's a talent coordinator or advisor. So yes, Tony Schiavone is going to now be advising the young green talent on what they should do in their matches to actually try and draw money and get over to a nationwide fan base. The same Tony Schiavone who's completely phoned it in and is obviously just there to pick up a paycheck because he's totally on board with all this modernized stunt show garbage we see in a given week. And, you know, going back on the subject of Madison Rayne for a minute, was Madison Rayne ever really somebody that we would consider a gifted mind for the business? I mean, her work in TNA was never bad or anything from what I remember, but she wasn't a Gail Kim in terms of work rate or anything. The problem is I don't remember a whole lot about her run in TNA to judge whether or not her as an agent for the girls division is of net benefit. But that's kind of the problem, don't you think? Why wouldn't you be promoting girls like Serena Deeb for that role? Girls that we know can actually work and would actually have something to offer. Or, I mean, Christ almighty, if you're really serious about committing to trying to improve the girls division, you know, why aren't you sitting there and trying to buy Sarah Del Rey out of her WWE contract to come over and help out? You know, Sarah did some really good work as a coach in NXT for a lot of those girls. Wouldn't she be a better financial investment than Madison Rayne? Who, again, I don't ever remember being that big of a female star to warrant a position like this. And all these changes to their personnel, will it have any major impact on the quality of the TV show? My guess is probably not. Because unless you have a real strong mind for the business and understand what actually works and what doesn't, the end result will always be the same. I'm glad Tony's finally realizing that he can't run the entire ship on his own, elsewise he'll put himself into a coma trying to run this all by himself. But with the names I just mentioned, nah. I really don't see how it's a major improvement in any way. Sure didn't help with this episode, especially not with the way it opened. Look, I said I wasn't going to harp on this show longer than necessary. I have said my piece about Orange Cassidy more times than I can count, and at this stage, I don't care if you put him in the ring with the lowest of the totem pole or the fucking Rock. The gimmick sucks, it's been overexposed, and I just don't have the energy to vent about it anymore. Tony's infatuation with this guy it's seriously unhealthy. I'm really concerned that Tony may need to seek counseling for the amount of screen time he dedicates to this asshat. What he does behind closed doors is his business, but if there's a porn category for Orange Cassidy out there, I'm sure it's Tony's go-to. You know, and even the visual of seeing him in there with Jay Lethal, it's beyond insulting to me. That guy has so much talent, and you would never know it by the way he's featured on AEW. Had a great old-school pay-per-view match with Samoa Joe 2 weeks ago, and here he is on AEW TV doing a 15-minute comedy match with an undercard douchebag. Ridiculous. So I skipped all the way to the Evident Afterbirth where they set up Wardlow versus Jay Lethal for the TNT title. And it will be happening on Battle of the Belts. A show that I will not be watching because why would I? Not only was I completely unaware that the show was even happening to begin with, not that they ever plugged it at any point on Dynamite in the last week, but the last 2 Battle of the Belts shows that I did watch, it was another waste of an hour with a couple title matches that were just kind of there. And we were given no reason to care about them to begin with. And I like Jay Lethal. Wardlow, I would like to get behind him, but it's nearly impossible when we only see him sporadically appear on TV or he's feuding with Mark Sterling and 20 untrained geeks in security outfits. And by the way, while we're on the subject of this, can anyone rationally explain why I should give 2 shits about Jay Lethal going after the TNT title when he just did a job to Samoa Joe on pay-per-view for another completely separate title? Who could possibly care? Up next, we had the return of The Boom. It's been several weeks since Adam Cole's been on television, and well, now I know why I wasn't clamoring to see him back. Where to even begin with this thing? Well, first, the entire Undisputed Elite comes out, including the Beta Bucks, and Cole gets on the stick and starts plugging the upcoming Trios tournament, a tournament that apparently either begins or concludes at the All Out pay-per-view, yet we still have no idea who's in this thing or why we should care. But Cole's talking about, I don't even know what, something about being loyal and how he's here to play with his friends because they like giving each other hand jobs in the locker room or something childish like that. All the while, I'm sitting there wondering to myself, I really would like to know what Bill Watts would have done if he was watching these jagoffs act like middle school teenagers on a wrestling show. Probably would have stretched them all, hung them upside down over a pot of boiling oil, and skinned them alive. So anyway, we eventually get to the Vince Russo swerve of the week. We had a completely pointless and random heel turn last week that made no sense at all. So obviously a week later, it's time to do another pointless and random heel swerve that made absolutely no sense at all. So Cole, Fish, and O'Reilly jump the Bucks and start putting the boots to them. There was one single young boy in the crowd that they found that was visibly crying, so they made sure to film his reaction. Everyone else was either doing the droning boo or just sitting on their hands wondering what the fuck is going on. And they're going to Pillmanize the Bucks' necks with a chair, but that gets put to a halt when Adam Page runs out to send the heels packing. And when I initially saw Page run out with a pipe, I was like, all right, a run-in where someone actually brings an equalizer to the ring. Makes the babyface actually look smart for a change. And then I saw the butterfly printed jeans, and it brought me back to the reality of, oh yeah, I forgot. They're all a bunch of teeny bopper dorks cosplaying as grown adults on a wrestling show. So of course Adam Page is going to come out in feminine looking attire, making the save for the Bucks in their ridiculous get-ups. Seriously, what else is there to say about it? It's 5 supposed grown adults doing phony middle school drama class segments on a wrestling show. Not a single one of them has a drip of testosterone in their body. The whole thing just comes off as watered-down, scripted WWE-like bullshit. And I hate to say that about Cole, Fish, and O'Reilly, but my God have the mighty fallen. The once best push unit in modern wrestling in one company is now the single worst case of go-away heat on the other channel. But this is the kind of shit people are into, I guess. Whatever subset of the incel elite fans out there, they love this kid-alt garbage with the Bucks and the Hangman and the Undisputed Era. I could tell you I was embarrassed watching this at home, and I was the only one in the room. I can only imagine what it's like for the grown men with wives and girlfriends that actually watch this stuff. They walk in the room and see this crap on television. Those dudes never get laid again. Oh, and by the way, for those of you that are averse to figure it out, don't let this segment fool you. You know why they did this Bucks face turn. Anything to get those guys out of doing a third job for FTR. That's the only reason for them doing this. As conceited as those two idiots are, they're not dumb. They know that the only story way of getting out of doing that rubber match with FTR and doing the job for them in the end is by turning face from seemingly out of nowhere. And anyone out there that tries to spin it any other way, you're a fool. Plain and simple. We had a quick Moxley promo where he was talking about painting the canvas with people's blood and drilling teeth into the ring mat, and yeah, I kind of zoned out. Same thing in the following segment where Jungle Boy tried to run over Christian Cage with a car, but got flanked by security and kicked out of the building. Looked like they were holding back a teenager trying to jump the guy running the hot dog stand. Then we had Dr. Britt Baker and Jamie Hayter in a match against Thunder Rosa and Toni Storm. Oh, I'm sorry, Thunderstorm. Sorry, it's just... No, never mind. I'll give credit where it's due. I did at least appreciate the fact that Rosa and Storm were adhering to actually tagging in and out for about 70% of the match. The fact that I have to bring that up in the context of a tag match is sad in and of itself. Generally, I would say the match was going along just fine until they had to get way too cute with all the angles. There's a spot at one point where Britt and Rosa are just kind of exchanging forearms in the ring. Meanwhile, Toni is on the top rope in position to do some kind of drop kick or dive. And Rebels... I don't even know what the fuck she was doing. She was standing there on the apron while Toni was looking at her. And then finally, Toni just kind of shoved her and Rebel took a bump. And of course, it breaks down like every tag match does, where everyone's in the ring doing shit while the ref just stands around like an idiot watching. At that point, I kind of just checked out and lost interest. It was good up until everyone started crowding the ring and doing four-way spots, and then it just ended up turning into a muddled mess like every AEW match does. And I kind of touched on it before, how they're really pushing for a lot of these female tag teams that have all just sort of popped up from out of nowhere. Don't be surprised when they introduce those women's tag belts. Remember, the goal is to make sure everybody in AEW has a belt by the end of the year. So, introducing another set of belts is exactly what we need. There was a pre-tape in here where Sammy Guevara and Ty Conti were sucking face in Paris. Apparently they're getting married, which can perfectly be summed up with Eddie Kingston's promo. Congratulations, nobody cares. I echo that statement. We had a powerhouse Hobbs squash, which is great. Fucking killed the guy in 20 seconds, which is exactly what needed to happen. Should have been doing this like 2 years ago when Hobbs first debuted. Instead, they've wasted the dude in a bunch of meaningless battle royals and multi-mans where the guy never got a chance to shine. But, better late than never, I guess. Oh yeah, and by the way, Taz mentioned on commentary, Team Taz is just done now. Yep. That was their blow-off for the Team Taz split. I'm done, Gus. And now all three guys will get lost in the shuffle on the roster just like everyone else. There were a couple other things I skipped over here, including another Miro promo about God. And I believe I also saw a graphic for a Brody King Darby Allin coffin match next week. Because we have not seen one of those in well over a month, so I guess it's time to break out the coffin stip again for no reason. Then we had Christian Cage versus Matt Hardy, and well, I'll say this. Obviously, these guys are professionals. They know what they're doing. They know how to piece together a good wrestling match. It's Matt Hardy versus Christian Cage in 2022. I have not been remotely interested in anything Matt's been involved with in a very long time, and because they totally butchered the Jungle Boy Christian feud, hate to say it, but now I'm kind of over Christian. Watching the match in a vacuum, it was very good. If anything, I was excited to see someone do a fucking back body drop, which is almost unheard of in the business today. The one Matt gave Christian off the top rope was kind of scary, but looked good. You know, people will probably shit on the match for being slow and boring, but you know what? On this show, slow and boring might actually be a good thing. Because God forbid you have a match where guys are methodically trying to work over a body part or telling a story in some manner, instead of flipping around like fish out of water for 20 plus minutes and getting injured like Dante Martin did. Then you have to sit on the shelf for 6 months because they don't know how to work properly. So I ended up enjoying this. The table spot at the end, I don't know. At least it led to the finish, but again, man, it's hard to get excited about stuff like this anymore. You know, we see table bumps every week on this show. Most of them end up happening for no reason and never end up leading to anything of value. In fact, we saw another table bump in a match that happened less than an hour later. I don't even know why I get mad anymore. So anyway, after Hardy missed the elbow drop through the table off the apron, Christian threw him back into the ring and hit him with a kill switch for the 3. And he tried to give Hardy the concerto afterwards, but Luchasaurus stalked Christian down the aisleway. Also, Jungle Boy could hit the ring from behind like a coward with a chair and send Christian running through the crowd. Oh yeah, and Jungle Boy now has a new t-shirt. It says, Christian Cage is a pussy. Yeah, that Jungle Boy is a man's man. Then we had Ethan Page asking why he's not on television every week. Good question, Ethan. How about you go ask Booker Man? So he's in there doing a heel promo for a couple minutes, and while he's talking, Stokely Hathaway just kind of walks down the aisle and stands behind him playing with himself, just totally distracting from Ethan's promo. And after Ethan got done talking, he turned around and saw Stokely standing there. And then Stokely gave Ethan his business card, and the masked dweeb mentioned that Stokely did the same thing with Lee Moriarty. To which I immediately said, if he did, we didn't see it on television, therefore, I don't care. There was a comically bad skit in the back where Anna Jay was choking out a security guard while Matt Menard and Angelo Parker were standing there egging her on. But the best part is that while Anna is there choking out this guy in a sleeper, there's Tony Schiavone standing there not lifting a finger to try and help. Just talking into the microphone, totally not giving a fuck. Don't ever change, Tony. Then, for absolutely no reason, we had a totally random first ever dumpster match with the Acclaimed and the Ass Boys. Why? Well, I guess because Tony was watching the WrestleMania 14 dumpster match with Cactus Jack, Chainsaw Charlie, and the New Age Outlaws and decided, hey, Billy was in a dumpster match at one point, so let's book his sons in one. The only good part of it was Max Caster's rap beforehand where he was mocking Vince McMahon's retirement and laughing at Joe Biden testing positive for COVID for the second time in under a month. The rest of it was every usual garbage match you've ever seen on AEW. Only this time they had actual garbage involved, so I guess it was very fitting. Of course, they had to involve the gimmick aluminum trash cans because God forbid we ever have a hardcore match without the use of fake garbage cans and or kendo sticks. And they hit each other with stuff. They brawled up the ramp to the top of the stage. And the big spot at the end was Austin climbing the set to try and do something. And of course, Max Caster is pursuing behind so they could set up the deal with the dumpster. And I did laugh when Caster threw Austin into the dumpster, and of course they had to make it obvious that they padded the landing, so when Austin goes into it, all the packing peanuts fly out of it. Probably had a crash pad in there too, because it's AEW. And then Caster hit Colton with the Macho Man elbow drop through a table for our second completely useless table bump in one night. And then Bowens threw Colton into the dumpster so they could zip tie the lid shut. Of course, they had to take it too far with pushing the dumpster off the stage. And unfortunately, a spot like this only works if the guns are being written off of television entirely, because elsewise, how are we supposed to believe that these guys aren't fucking dead? But the main event. This main event right here speaks volumes of how insufferable Chris Jarrett has become. It's also a good reflection of how bad of a booker Tony is, but we already knew that. And I'll use his name here so that we're on the same page, but the main event of this show is Chris Jericho versus Wheeler Yuta. And I think the stipulation here is that Jericho was putting his title shot with Moxley on the line. Why? I have no idea. I guess they shot an angle on Rampage that all of 20,000 people are still watching, so obviously we were already clued in onto what was going on. And before they rang the bell for this, out comes Claudio Castagnoli to corner Yuta, because you also had Parker and Menard ringside in Jericho's corner. And this all leads to a spot before the commercial break where the heels try to run interference on Jericho's behalf, but after Aubrey ejects them from ringside, well, of course, Claudio's allowed to stay. Even Taz is sitting there pointing out, yeah, probably would tell Claudio to go hit the bricks too, but of course she doesn't. And honestly, I'm not even sure if Claudio did stay, because when they came back from break, I don't ever remember seeing Claudio there for the remainder of the segment, so I guess he just walked off. And they're doing stuff for a while. At one point, Jericho had Yuta in the walls, and Yuta got the ropes for a break. And of course, 30 seconds later, he's back on his feet, hitting 3 consecutive suicide topes to Jericho on the floor, not even bothering to sell the ankles or the legs. And they're going back and forth at the end. Somehow Jericho got a hold of Floyd, the baseball bat, but Aubrey grabbed it and turned away so Jericho could kick Yuda in the balls. And because they never can just keep things simple in AEW, of course Yuda has to get a flash 2 count before Jericho finally taps the guy out with a lion tamer. So, let me see if I get my timeline right here. At the Ring of Honor pay-per-view, Wheeler Yuta beat Daniel Garcia to retain the Pure Championship, just so Garcia could come out less than a week later and beat Bryan Danielson via ref stoppage on Dynamite. Just so a week later, Yuta can do a job to Jericho in the main event of Dynamite. So in other words, everybody's on an even playing field in AEW. Daniel Garcia can't beat Wheeler Yuta, but he can beat Bryan Danielson, but Yuta can't beat Chris Jericho, but he can beat Daniel Garcia, who, did I mention, beat Bryan Danielson. Can we get consistency with anything on this stupid show? Don't answer that. I already know. You know, and by the way, not to dwell on this whole tangent for longer than necessary, but if Jericho is challenging Moxley for the world title next week, why is he doing a 50-50 back and forth match with Wheeler fucking Yuta? And I know this will piss off all the AEW diehards because how dare I not see the greatness in Hot Wheel Yuta as an in-ring talent? Yeah, you know what? I don't see the greatness. Whatever the smarks see in this guy beyond the fact that he's a good athlete, I don't get it. I've said a million times that Yuta is a good athlete, but this whole thing of him being a megastar in the making or wrestling's future generation, I want to know what these whack jobs are smoking. If he's the future of wrestling, God help the next generation, man. Vern Gagne, Bruno Sammartino, Harley Race, Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, Steve Austin, The Rock, Wheeler Yuta. Right on, man. So, yeah, that was Dynamite. Aside from a trios tournament where none of the participants have been announced yet, I have no idea what they're building to for that all-out show in several weeks. What I do know is that it probably won't involve CM Punk, MJF, and or Bryan Danielson in any way, so can't say I'm all that intrigued right now. I also read a report that apparently Dax is hurt, which means that we probably won't be getting an FTR match either. The closest thing they have to anything I remotely care about right now is Powerhouse Hobbs and Ricky Starks, and unfortunately it's them feuding with one another instead of going after the tag titles, which would be 1,000 times better. But hey, on the bright side, we got the Undisputed Elite back, and they'll be on television every single week to bicker and banter like children about not being friends anymore. So that ought to be some riveting TV to get excited about. All right, let's give this another shot. I legitimately had to stop this recording so I could take a break because my voice just completely gave out on me. I've never had that happen before, but well, that's okay. AEW has officially killed me. So we're going to try to make it through this retro review without raising our voices. How about that? All right. Now on to the retro part without interruptions this time. This is NWA World Championship Wrestling from August 2nd, 1986. And we begin our show with David Crockett at an empty Fulton County Stadium in Atlanta. And while David's talking about all the various towns they visited throughout the 86 Bash Tour, They're panning the camera around the stadium. And we got a great visual at the sunrise, too. Added a nice little touch to the setting. And they eventually get to David in the shot. And he's just kind of hanging out in the dugout. And he's running down the card for the finale of the 86 Bash Tour later on in the night. And this is great, too, because while he's plugging the show and talking about how it's going to be fireworks, an exciting time, blah, blah, as they're zooming the camera out, you see a giant advertisement on a billboard in the back for Marlboro cigarettes. Hey, could have been worse. It could have been advertising Cools. So then we cut to Tony Schiavone at the studio, who is also plugging the Bash Tour. And one of the big announcements he made was the recent NWA World Heavyweight Championship change in Greensboro. Dusty Rhodes defeated Ric Flair in the cage to become a 3-time World Heavyweight Champion. And he says that he'll be conducting interviews later on in the program with both individuals, including an interview with a man that, quote, no longer has hair on his head, the Boogie Woogie Man Jimmy Valiant. Couldn't just say the newly shaved Jimmy Valiant. He had to make sure he baby-faced it. But then he turns his attention to Crusher Khrushchev and Ivan Koloff. And Crusher's talking about how there is no way Dusty can possibly defend the World Six-Man Tag titles along with the World's Heavyweight title because it is too strenuous of a task. And I think I put more emotion into that delivery than Crusher did. And while Ivan put over that they're reclaiming their six-man trophy, he also talks about a list of the fresh names that have started to show up in the NWA, including guys such as Buddy Landell, who technically wasn't new to the NWA scene. He just was unceremoniously let go at the end of 85. Bobby Jaggers, Dutch Mantell, and he also plugged Captain Redneck Dick Buddock. God, that accent was something else, wasn't it? So then Schiavone turned his attention to a pre-tape of all members of the Russians in a six-man tag against Randy Barber, Vernon Deaton, and Mike Simani. And if Crusher didn't already bore you to death with a sleep-inducing 30-second promo before, well, he surely did when he was calling the action here with Ivan and Schiavone. It's particularly great with Schiavone saying within the first 10 seconds of this match, a lot of intensity with the Russians. And Crusher responds with, that's right. Full of piss and vinegar, that Crusher Khrushchev was. Ivan was at least fun to listen to here. He needed a throat lozenge by the end of it, though. The entire match was the usual Russians massacre. Nikita won the match for his team by hitting the sickle on, as I wrote down here in my notes, the baldest of the three receding hairline jobbers. And after this, they cut back to the studio, and this is just awesome. The Russians are plugging Nikita's next match with Magnum in the best of 7 for the United States heavyweight title. And then Ivan starts talking about all the fan mail they've received from the American audience. So he pulls out a letter from his pocket and begins reading it, wherein he begins by acknowledging that he does not know what the word hey means. I guess Russian culture doesn't address people with the word hey. And as he continues reading, he gets to the next sentence where apparently the fan cursed him out by telling him to go back to Russia, so Ivan had to censor himself by saying, I can't say this word on TV. To which after he reads the hate mail on camera, he begins cutting a promo on the American audience, telling them to bring all their flags to witness Nikita becoming the United States champion later on. God, pro wrestling used to be so great. Then we had a Dusty Rhodes interview, talking about what it means to be the world champion, daddy, for a third time. And let me just say this while it's on my mind. One thing I always wondered growing up, especially being a pretty big fan of Dusty and not having a whole lot of insight into the business at a young age, I was always perplexed as to why Dusty never really had any kind of lengthy, prolonged world title run, Even during this period when he was the booker and sort of had the authority to put the belt on himself if he wanted to politic himself into that spot. And I think one thing that hit home with me when I started listening to the experts talk more about why Dusty was never any kind of long-term babyface champion, the argument of sometimes the chase is more appealing than the actual arrival. It makes a lot more sense as an adult now and looking back during this period of the business. A lot of people have made the argument that Dusty really didn't need the belt, and in a lot of cases that he was bigger than the belt itself. Not in the literal sense, even though, yes, I can imagine that it was a bit of a struggle for Dusty to actually hook the belt around his waist. But, it really goes to show just how much the business has changed in the last 30 or so years, and not really for the better. And especially when it comes to something like this. There will never be a period in wrestling again where a wrestler becomes such a megastar, such a household name, that he doesn't need a physical belt to be over. Because in a lot of cases, I really do agree with this. How in many ways, Dusty superseded the world championship, where because of the fact that he was so over, the belt was kind of an added bonus for him. I hate to use the term prop because it makes it look like I'm shitting on the legacy of the title, but I mean, really, with or without the belt, Dusty was never going to be any more or less over with the audience. With this particular title reign, he only had the belt for, something like 14 more days before he dropped it back to Flair. And, when Dusty lost the belt, did it hinder his career in any way? Absolutely not. Because the guy was so big and such a massive draw, the people were never going to lose faith in Dusty whether or not he had any kind of physical belt to his name. To them, he was still the American dream. Not trying to be all sentimental about this, but, really, man, you want to talk about why the business sucks today and nobody's ever going to achieve fame to the level these guys did in the 80s? Case in point right here, man. Staying on the topic of Dusty, though. God bless this poor man. He had to sit there while Tony Schiavone announced the Rock and Roll Express Summer Sizzler contest winners. I can't even begin to describe the look on Dusty's face when Tony was reading off the list of these winners and the girls that were going to get to spend a day with Ricky and Robert, or the two girls that won the date, the special dinner date. And meanwhile, Dusty is just sitting there biting his lip, probably thinking to himself, what in the fuck am I listening to right now? But they very quickly turned the subject over to hyping up the upcoming cage match with the Midnights and Jim Cornette going up against the Road Warriors and Baby Doll at Fulton County Stadium. And that eventually bled into them showing highlights of the Midnight Road Warriors match from the Superstation tapings a few weeks back in Raleigh. Obviously, this is the legendary TV match where Baby Doll potatoed Corny in the back of the skull and gave him a concussion. Speaking of Cornette, this poor man was sweating profusely. The bright lights really don't do justice as to just how hot it was in those buildings, man. Guaranteed it wasn't air conditioned either. And of course, Dusty's calling the action here, talking over it with audio, and he's taking note of Big Bubba, saying that he's going to, and I quote, feel his noggin. Don't ask. It was fun going back and watching it again, even with the dubbed over commentary from Dusty and Schiavone. I also got to relive the great moment here where Bobby Eaton got his ankle caught in the camera cord when the Road Warriors were throwing him in and out of the ring. But obviously the angle with Baby Doll at the end is why they went back and played this again. Really trying to sell that payoff of Baby Doll getting her hands on Courtney in the cage. I believe Dusty called her the Vavuxuous baby doll. But then we had tragedy strike here in Jim Crockett Promotions. The news is out. Jimmy the Boogie Woogie Man Valiant. He lost his hair. It was a hair versus hair match between him and Paul Jones. A matchup that sounds so ungodly ugly on paper, you thought it would probably be a rib. No, they actually did this match in 1986. So they take us to the final few minutes of that match, where both men are double juiced and Valiant's just whipping Jones around for about a minute. And he eventually goes to drop the big elbow, but Baron von Raschko gets up on the apron to run interference. And while Valiant goes to choke him out, Baron tosses in the loaded black glove to Paul Jones. Somehow the ref did not see this, despite the fact that he was not actively trying to get Baron down from the ring apron. But before Paul could hit Valiant with the glove, Valiant pulled out a loaded glove of his own, and he laid out Paul first. But once again, when he goes for the cover, Baron runs up to try and stop the count, and he is immediately thwarted by Manny Fernandez. So they're fighting in the ring. Once again, I'm not sure how this blatant ring interference does not directly lead to a DQ, but just roll with it. And finally, while the ref is dealing with those two, a bald Shaska Watley ran in to hit Valiant with a chair, and he put Jones' unconscious body on top of Valiant for the 3. It also took me about a full minute to realize the bald guy was Shaska. And this all led to a very over-dramatic sequence where all the babyfaces tried to beg and plead for the ref to overturn the call. Man, he's practically on the verge of tears with having to see poor Jimmy Valiant get his hair shaved. And the fans are all chanting the Bryan Danielson no gimmick about 25 years before it became popularized. And after Sandy Scott goes to start shaving Valiant with the clippers, they show Valiant's facial reaction to the whole thing. And when I tell you that this might have been the greatest hair angle in the history of wrestling, I don't think I'm exaggerating that. Mostly due to the way Valiant sold the entire head shaving. There were about 3 or 4 facial expressions he went through in this segment, starting with fiery rage and then eventually mellowing out to just consummate embarrassment. And by the end, I can't even describe this final expression on Valiant's face other than the deadpan, I'm going to fucking kill you look. Because at first, Valiant sees all these clumps of hair falling onto the ring mat. And it's like the most miserable, humiliating experience of his life. But when he looks out and he sees Paul Jones and the rest of the heels laughing and yucking it up on the outside, there's no other way to describe the look on Valiant's face, just staring a hole through these guys and probably thinking to himself, you motherfuckers. And the only thing I could think when it was all over, you know, as goofy as the whole Paul Jones Army story was, as horrific as most of these Bash Tour matches probably were, I kind of want to see this feud continue so I can watch Jimmy Valiant beat the shit out of Paul Jones. Think about how much effort that takes. When you know that even if the matches are going to be absolute garbage, you still want to watch it so you can see the babyface get his revenge. Even made better by Paul Jones sitting there with Bill Apter after the break and continuing to mock the entire situation. And of course it's Paul Jones, so he's fucking up every line and losing his train of thought, which led to them abruptly cutting the segment short once Jones started stumbling over himself. But, well, really wasn't out of the ordinary for a Paul Jones segment anyway. So then we cut to Tony Schiavone interviewing the Road Warriors to hype up the cage match with the Midnights. Hawk was, well, he was wacky. Sitting there talking about checking hot potatoes with forks to see if they're done, and how when you put the Road Warriors on the tracks with an oncoming locomotive, the train takes a dirt road. And albeit I had no fucking clue what these metaphors were supposed to signify, but Hawk was very convincing in his delivery. And we're talking about how the Midnights are scared of the Legion of Doom, but there's no running once they're locked inside that cage in Atlanta. He also addressed the Russians and talked about how they picked Dusty to team with them to go after these six-man titles because, well, apparently Dusty's a street person. And then Hawk finished by saying the only thing they know is how to beat people up, which is why they're the best. And since they enjoy beating people up, they're going to continue being the best for a long time. And this is all fantastic because you got these two giant behemoths sitting there talking about beating people up. And right before they pitch to break, Tony is calmly sitting there going, well, all right then. We'll be back with Nature Boy Ric Flair. A very soothing transition. I always wondered what it would have been like to ever try and do a Road Warrior sit down in like a coffee shop or something. You think Hawk and Animal would have known how to use inside voices? And then we had an all-time classic Ric Flair promo. And lo and behold, this was not boiling hot, stripped down to his underpants, dropping elbows on suit jackets Ric Flair. It was super stern, super modest Nature Boy Ric Flair. Still styling and profiling, but letting us all know that he's here to swallow his pride and make known that he is not the World Heavyweight Champion because Dusty proved that he was the better man. But the key is that he proved he was the better man on one night. Not that he was better than Rick. And now Dusty has to prove to him again in Atlanta that he's the man when they have their rematch. But he makes it known that his win-loss record speaks for itself, and it is only a matter of time before Dusty falls short of the mark, and it'll be Flair once again on top of Space Mountain as the man. So 2 weeks out, basically. And of course, they showed the last couple minutes of the cage match in Greensboro where Dusty cradled Flair with a small package to win. And he got all the baby faces filing in the ring to celebrate, including Ronnie Garvin, who's probably thinking to himself, yeah, I'll get there eventually. Just get another 12 months and some change. And, you know, I talked about it a little bit earlier, but even though the title reign was very short-lived, you could just feel the elation from the crowd when Dusty got that win. You know, they're showing the 18,000 plus people in the crowd. Not a single one of them is sitting in their seat. They're all giving Dusty a standing ovation. It's such a cool moment. You know, going back to the whole topic of the chase being worth more than the actual catch, there is something to be said, too, about giving people that short-term payoff of Dusty getting the win in the end. If only so the idea could be planted that Dusty could get it done in the end, even if the victory was brief. So, coming back from break, we had the Anderson brothers doing a sit-down, and they're starting this with talking about the Tully Blanchard-Ronnie Garvin tape fist match coming up in Atlanta, and they're talking about Garvin's recent statements about putting his career on the line, essentially by saying that if he couldn't beat Tully, then he would walk away from the wrestling business. And Arn and Ole kind of gave their 2 cents on the whole matter, saying it's a stupid idea, it's poor judgment, and Ronnie's wearing his emotions on his sleeve. And that led to a highlight reel of the Black Bart Ronnie Garvin match from a few weeks back. Ole and Arn are spending most of the match making valid claims that Ronnie gets away with using an illegal closed fist, yet the NWA officials never do anything about it, of which Tony Schiavone had pretty much no comeback for it. I also appreciated Ole taking Bart to task for not working over Garvin's previously injured wrist, which the Andersons were responsible for. And the only reason that comment about Bart not working a previously injured body part is hilarious is if you've been following the Minnesota Wrecking Crew matches on television, the entire gimmick with the way they work their matches is by specifically targeting body parts. Whether it was an arm, a leg, an ankle, a neck, what have you. Obviously, though, this was the match where Ronnie pinned Bart with his feet on the ropes after Bart tried something similar earlier on, but the ref had caught him. So after Ronnie won by cheating, Ole and Arn pitched a fit about it, and they talked about how NWA management is conspiring against the Horsemen. Just great heel stuff. And then they wrapped this up with plugging the matches in Atlanta for later on. In addition to Flair and Dusty for the world title and Tully and Ronnie in a tape fist match, we also have the Andersons versus the Rock and Roll Express in a bunkhouse brawl. And I love this because Arn's sitting there trying to passively congratulate Dusty on winning the world title, and Ollie is sitting next to him the entire time, and he cuts him off, and he goes, "What the fuck are you talking about?" Saying instead of congratulating him, he ought to be taken out and, well, never mind. Gotta love Ole, man. Very little filter with that guy, but he was very direct. He just told you like it is. And this actually fired Ole up because he's sitting there talking about how justice will be served in Atlanta in the cage match with Flair and Dusty, and they can surround the ring with whatever they want, be it a cage or a sea of cops, but if Ole has to bring wire cutters down to the ring to make sure it's a fair fight, then so be it. Just saying the quiet part out loud. Says he's sick of seeing Dusty stand there with his hands in the air and celebrating, and at the end of the night, Dusty will not be the world champion, and he will not leave the building under his own power. And that was a passionate reading from the Book of Ole. And then we had the best thing on the show. Not only the return of Nature Boy Buddy Landell, but superstar Bill Dundee in his patented Elvis gear. Good God, dude. Bill Dundee. How do you even begin to describe that guy? Aside from the obvious fact that he was a hell of a promo. Funny enough, my earliest memories of Dundee was watching old Mid-South tapes from his run back in '84 when he was a babyface on television. Also when he was the booker. And then I went back years later and watched his stuff as a heel in Memphis, and I'm like, boy, was I missing out. So here he is in 1986 in Crockett Promotions, immediately firing on all cylinders. Dude knows how to whip up dialogue faster than Ben Shapiro. Guaranteed if I tried slowing this down and listening at 0.5 speed, I think it'd still be too fast to pick on what he was saying. And of course he's sitting there next to Buddy, who was a pretty damn great promo himself. Sitting there talking about how the last time he was in the NWA, that no good bogus Ric Flair was stealing his gimmick, so it's only fitting that Dusty is now walking around as the world champion. But they essentially said that they're here to claim gold and take on the best competition on the roster, up to and including Dusty and the Road Warriors. They must have a death wish. And then we get footage of a Buddy Landell versus George South match at the studio. Landell's first match back on the Superstation in well over 7 months since his abrupt departure at the end of '85. And for the majority of the match, Landell was really pushing for that big showdown with him and Flair. And it's kind of one of those what-if scenarios in the NWA that never really panned out. They had a match, I think it was in the summer of '85, which was Buddy's first shot at the World Heavyweight Championship. Of course, Flair won that match. And even though Landell resurfaced here in mid-'86 and he was taking shots at Flair on television over a period of weeks, for whatever reason, they never went to the well with this feud again. Of course, later in the year, Landell ended up leaving Crockett Promotions again right before showing up on Bill Watts' UWF TV. And I never knew the backstory with why they never rematched Flair and Landell at any point. Especially when it was clear that they were teasing it on television. Could have been a political game on Flair's part. Could have been the fact that Buddy thought he should have had a run with the belt, and once the reality hit that he wasn't going to get elevated to that spot, maybe they soured on the program. But this is kind of the big angle for Buddy in '86 with him calling out Flair over a period of months. And like I said, we never get the match. Very odd. Speaking of newbies on the scene, we had the television debut of the Kansas Jayhawks, the team of Hangman, Bobby Jaggers, and Dirty Dutch Mantel. And just so we can put this to bed right here, right now, no. Hangman Adam Page does not in any way, shape, or form compare to Hangman Bobby Jaggers, past, present, or future. So while they're putting over their success as singles wrestlers, right now they have their eyes set on the Midnight Express and the NWA World Tag Team Championships. Dutch talks about how even though Corny has a tennis racket at his disposal, Dutch has an equalizer of his own. It is the 10-foot bullwhip. And while they waited a long time to get their opportunity to challenge the Midnights, they're hot on their trail, and it's only a matter of time before the Jayhawks dethrone the Midnights and become the new champions. And the last thing I wrote down in this segment has absolutely nothing to do with the actual promo material or any story context, but it is still a statement worth mentioning. Dutch Mantel had body hair in places that I didn't even know could grow hair. The dude had long sleeves on in this promo, and I can still visibly see that his hand is covered in hair. And it's not even like a brown or like a light shade that was barely visible on camera. Even in standard definition, it was solid black. Disgusting. And in our final segment of the program, we had a sit-down with Dick Murdoch. All kinds of fresh names showing up here on this episode. And he starts by putting over the competition in the NWA. Total babyface promo here. He did name drop the WWF, talking about his recent run as a tag champion with Adrian Adonis, but that he came back to the NWA because that is where the best competition was, to which they then cut to a studio match with him and Bill Mulkey. So like I said, the best competition in the NWA. God bless Murdoch doing commentary on this. Sitting there trying to lend credibility to Bill fucking Mulkey, of all people. Saying whether it takes him 3 minutes or 12 minutes to beat the guy, he still gets paid the same. As if anyone in their right mind thought it would ever take Dick Murdoch 12 minutes to beat one of the Mulkey brothers. But the big deal here at the end is that he won with the Brainbuster, and that led Shivani into plugging gorgeous Jimmy Garvin, who also used the Brainbuster as a finish. And while Murdoch is talking about the possibilities of getting in the ring with Jim Garvin, he also takes a minute to plug an upcoming match with Arn Anderson for the TV title. By far the best part of this whole thing is him talking about the Russians and how he was proud to be a member of the Marine Corps. And while the Russians are running their mouths and trying to disparage the American way of life, the fact of the matter is they're reaping the benefits of the American lifestyle right now instead of living in Russia. So if they're so proud of their homeland, maybe they ought to try to live there and see how it works out for them. This is probably another reason I love going back and watching classic wrestling tapes. Everyone's a fucking grown adult, and they love what our country stands for. You ain't getting promo material like this in today's business, I promise you that. Not with all the wokesies running the major networks. Pro-America dialogue, patriotic promos, can't have that. So that was all great. He also talked about the possibilities of teaming up with Dusty on television and how much that would mean to him. But the bottom line is he's proud to represent our country, and he's looking forward to the opportunities ahead. And that was kind of how they wrapped up the show from there. A lot of sit-downs this week. Lots of interviews. Lots of wrap-up with the Bash Tour and the final plugs for the Atlanta show. But, I'll say this. This particular episode really put a lot of things into perspective about today's product. No one can cut a fucking promo to save their lives anymore. It's amazing going back and listening to the way promos were done 30 years ago and just reflect on how genuine and authentic everyone sounded. It's like a night and day comparison, man. Did guys trip over themselves a time or two? Sure. Did they get tongue-tied once in a blue moon? Absolutely. But you want to know what these guys had that no one has in today's business? Conviction. The fact that you could buy and believe every single word that everyone delivered, be it babyface or heel lines. Everyone is so soft these days. Everything's so overly rehearsed and scripted out. Nobody knows how to even make themselves sound like they're in a convincing fight. It's a damn shame we'll never get guys like this in the business ever again. As great as your CM Punks and your Bryan Danielsons and the MJFs of the world are on the stick, man, even those guys don't really have the same fire or passion like Flair, Dusty, or the Andersons did. Those guys, at least I can buy that they went out of their way to study and listen to these guys' promo material during their careers. But even with a studio show with minimal wrestling like this one, where it's mostly talk and hype for the end of the Bash Tour, still leaps and bounds better than Dynamite. No fucking denying that. And that'll segue us into World Class Championship Wrestling, the August 6th, 1983 edition. I think it's the 6th. It's either the 5th or the 6th. One of the two. And we open the show with a Stephen P. News sponsor. No, I'm just kidding. Although I will admit, Jim Cornette's podcast has kind of ruined the intro to world-class television for me because now I am subconsciously singing the Stephen P. New lyrics to the intro. Never going to be able to hear it any other way. They actually opened the show with a full replay of the Iceman versus Buddy Roberts hair match from the Reunion Arena show, a match that we have already reviewed in full, so there's no sense in re-reviewing it. Just go back a few weeks and watch it when we recapped it on tape delay. It was still a great match, and it did get me thinking while I was rewatching it, be nice if we saw this kind of stuff on AEW on occasion. With all the hot garbage we see on that show in a given week, a video replay or a highlight reel would kind of be useful. Well, at least it'd be useful for everyone that didn't have ADHD and actually remembered all that shit. But moving along here, we had a Gentleman Chris Adams pre-tape. And of course, because he's an Englishman from across the pond, he is the stereotypical appreciator of soccer. The only sport that Americans pretend to give a shit about during the World Cup every 5 years, but goddamn, those Europeans, man. They love themselves some football. Anyway, Bill Mercer is trying to get Adams' take on the world of soccer and how he came to appreciate it at a young age. And the entire time I'm listening to Adams bore me into a coma by talking about a completely useless sport, I am wondering, are we going to get anything pertaining to wrestling in this segment? Well, we did. Chris Adams wants a shot at the American Heavyweight Championship. That was the extent of the wrestling talk. And then Adams went to play some more soccer. And then coming back from the break, we had Chris Adams against the Mongol. Of course, these two have had a little bit of a blood feud going at one point. It actually took me until Mercer brought that up where I was wondering, wait, is this another replay clip? Because we have definitely seen this match on television before. As it turns out, it was not a replay. And, well, here's the extent of what I wrote down. Mongol jumpstarts Adams before the bell. He dumps Adams out of the ring. Adams gets on the ring apron. Then Mongol dumped Adams out of the ring again. Adams tried to get back on the ring apron a second time. Mongol proceeded to dump Adams out of the ring a third time. And I went to check my phone real quick. And when I looked back at the screen, Adams was still on the floor trying to get back into the ring. This is about 65% of the match. And I was about halfway tempted to begin fast-forwarding until something of interesting note happened. And then finally, Adams milked a short comeback, hit Mongol with about 5 super kicks, and then he threw Mongol over the top rope to the floor for the blatant DQ. There was also a post-match deal where Adams gave Mongol the suicide dive onto the floor and then did a wacky little handstand flip in the ring, both of which were far more impressive than anything in the actual match. I also kind of regret giving Mongol any praise in last week's tag match with Terry Gordy after the performance I saw here. I think we can now confidently confirm beyond a shadow of a doubt. That guy sucked. No offense to Mongol. I'm sure he was a very nice guy, but yeah, when he's in there wrestling on his own, that guy was the shits. Then we had the Iceman King Parsons taking on Mr. Ebony, who I still forget A, exists on this show, and B, is aligned with Devastation Incorporated. I did kind of find it funny when Mercer was trying to draw our attention to Mr. Ebony's great physique in this match, only to then realize that his body was being completely covered by a singlet and large tights that were pulled well over his belt line. I mean, his arms were noticeably large. I'll give him that. Best part of the match is Buddy Roberts coming down to ringside, and the fans immediately start a Baldy chant. The Dallas crowd stole my gimmick, man. But of course, this is all done so that after Parsons beat Ebony with the hip attack, Buddy could run in to do the afterbirth angle with Ebony helping him out. And that didn't last all that long before the Iceman fought them both off and sent them packing. And he did a good little post-match interview with Mercer, talking about how he has a rematch with Buddy next week. But he also wants one more shot at Mr. Ebony, which kind of found odd. Like, I mean, he beat the guy clean in the middle of the ring with his finish, and the match was not remotely intriguing to where I thought when it was over, yeah, I could go for round 2 of the Iceman versus Mr. Ebony. But whatever. The fans really wanted Bruiser in this segment for that post-match attack, but they didn't get him. Iceman just made his own comeback and sent the heels running. Bummer. And then we had the main event. 6-man tag action. The Von Erichs taking on Michael Hayes, Buddy Roberts, and gorgeous Jim Garvin. Guess Terry Gordy was in the bathroom or something for this taping. You know, it's something we talk about all the time in these world-class reviews, but for as many times as they went to the well with the Von Erich Freebirds matchups on Dallas television, the people were always into them. And, you know, they really did make a concerted effort to freshen things up as much as possible. You know, whether it was throwing in different heels and faces to team up with either party, you know, booking side angles and storylines with the Freebirds and the Von Erichs so that they weren't always constantly at odds with one another. It's easy to sit here with modern eyes and say, God damn, is anyone else sick of seeing these guys wrestle? But at least I can make the argument that in 1983, this shit was going to get over no matter what. Whereas in 2022, the people see the same dudes fighting all the time and no one gives a fuck. Fun match, though. It's always interesting seeing how the Von Erichs would lay out their matches when they're teaming up. You know, sometimes you got Kevin doing the extensive selling during the heat. Sometimes it's Kerry. David was usually the one to get the initial hot tag, and that makes sense. I mean, he was a big guy, so he wasn't going to be doing any long-term selling. But Von Erich matches were always different, and that's good. You know, it means their matches are always must-see because you never know how things are going to go. Kevin got his foot busted up pretty badly in this match. It's probably why I wouldn't recommend guys wrestle without shoes, especially in today's business. I still cringe every time I see Matt Riddle either do some kind of leap or dive onto his feet because, I'm afraid he's either going to shatter an ankle or break a toe. Kerry took the brunt of the heat in this match after some heel shenanigans, and that built nicely to David getting the hot tag. And eventually things broke down at the end with all 6 guys. Garvin ends up giving Kerry the belly-to-back suplex, but Kevin, who was the legal guy, gives Garvin the crossbody attack off the top rope for the big pin. So that is yet another fall that poor Jim Garvin takes on world-class television. And I'll say this real quickly because I thought about it while I was watching this match. You hear me come on here and constantly talk about how much I hate multi-man matches in wrestling anymore because, they're usually just a clusterfuck of guys doing random stuff with no rhyme or reason. Nobody tags in and out. It's impossible to keep track of what's going on. Everyone's just doing streams of moves nonstop, blah, blah. It's really a lost art in the business these days because 6-mans and 8-mans used to really feel like special attraction matches. We reviewed so many of these, especially on world-class television with all the Freebirds and Von Erichs matches, and no matter what the pairings are or who's working the match, they're always great. They're always so fun to watch, man. And you want to know why? They're easy to follow, things make sense, the layout and structure is on point, they know how to get the heat, they know when to build to the hot tag, and they know when to go to the finish. Instead of it just being a never-ending sea of guys hitting moves until some kind of flat finish at the end, they actually wait and build to a climax where things break down with all 6 guys. And evidently, the chaos leads to the fucking finish like it should. And nowadays, the clusterfuck spot would be a pitch to commercial, and then they'd come back with the heels working over a guy in a headlock. It's why I dread anytime I see AEW announce a 6-man or an 8-man tag on TV anymore because I know what it's going to be. Everything I just mentioned about the way multi-man matches are done today. And it's why it's impossible for me to care about those trios belts because I know how the matches are going to go. It's the same conversation and why I hate triple threats and 4-ways and 5-ways. Unless the match involves guys that actually know what they're doing and know how to actually construct a logical multi-man tag, I'm either leaning in the direction of skipping past it or not paying that close attention. It sucks, but it's just the reality of the business we're in now. So anyway, getting back to the show real quick. They kind of close things out with Mercer bringing up a fact that I've sort of been joking about with a lot of these world-class reviews. The fact that the Von Erichs seem to have the Freebirds number and that the heels can't get a win over any of them. And Michael Hayes lets us all know that Jimmy Garvin is good, but he isn't Terry Bam Bam Gordy. So the next time it's the Freebirds and the Von Erichs in 6-man action, the result will be different. We'll see about that. Overall, this is kind of one of those TV shows where you can probably skip over a majority of it, obviously except the main event, and you're really not missing a whole lot. Yeah, the 6-man main event was very good, but in terms of major story development or big angles, wasn't a whole lot to talk about in great detail. They set up a couple TV matches for next week, and they teased some stuff with the Iceman and Devastation Inc., but yeah, not really a groundbreaking episode in any way. But even a mildly disappointing episode of World Class is still better than what you get most weeks with wrestling anymore. Anyhow, as we wrap up the show for today, I'm trying to think off the top of my head if there's anything upcoming this weekend. Aside from the Battle of the Belts, which I have no vested interest in watching. But aside from that, I don't think there's anything major. We did the Ring of Honor review 2 weeks ago, and SummerSlam was this past weekend. And yeah, All Out isn't until the first week of September. I think the NWA 74 two-night extravaganza is coming up in a couple weeks, but for the month of August, the only thing we'll be covering in addition to the WWF Retro Raws and NWA Power, I think it would be the 1993 SummerSlam at the end of the month. Kind of weird to think that August used to be a very busy month for wrestling, and this year, there's not a whole lot going on. Everything got pushed back a month earlier. That's fine. Not really complaining about it. August is usually a very busy month for people anyway, so it's probably better that wrestling gets in all of its big pay-per-views for the summer by mid to late July. But we will be back on Monday for more cartoony WWF Raw reporting, and hopefully an episode of NWA Power that's less empowering. Take care, all. Peace out.